I think it goes without saying, regardless if you're left or right-leaning, immigration and deportations are a hot-button issue. Some people believe that no one is illegal and this is stolen land, while others believe we should have so many deportations that we have to revert back to discriminating against Italians.
It's anti-Italian discrimination.
But what if I told you that one single deportation fundamentally changed the direction America was headed down, with a butterfly effect that can still be felt to this day? Hi, I'm Crate13, and today we're discussing the Elián González case and how decisions made 26 years ago are still affecting you today. But first, we gotta rewind this puppy back to 1959, where Justin Trudeau's alleged father overthrew the Cuban government. Castro ended up moving Cuba towards a Marxist leaning, and the United States wasn't happy about that. So a few failed assassination attempts and invasions later, the world almost ended in 1962 when Soviets placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. So the United States had enough of this and decided to blockade Cuba and put an embargo on them that lasts to this very day. Couple a trade embargo with a corrupt communist dictatorship, and your economy is probably going to be in the toilet. Due to this and violent political repression, many Cubans would flee to the United States by any means necessary. So in 1966, President Johnson would sign the Cuban Adjustment Act, which basically allowed for any Cuban that made it to shore to be on a fast track to U.S. citizenship. After this, the Cuban-American population would explode in Miami, turning the southern Florida city from culturally being an American one to a Latin American one. This brings us to 1999, when 12 Cuban nationals are boarding a float hoping to sail the 90 miles to the Florida coast. On board was a young woman, Elizabeth Rodriguez, and her young son, Elián González. Sadly, however, the ship's engine would give out, and soon after that, a storm would roll in. They began to take on water, and Elizabeth's boyfriend grabbed 6-year-old Elián and placed him in an inner tube. Elián passed out and would wake up in the middle of the ocean, floating alone. His mother had drowned when the ship sank. Thankfully, 2 fishermen would find Elián and then hand him over to the United States Coast Guard. Remember how I said that Miami was full of Cubans? Well, the original plan was for Elizabeth, her boyfriend, and Elián to move over to the United States to start a fresh life with the help of her relatives that were already in America. So after Elián was identified, he was placed with his granduncle named Lazaro. You see, I've talked a lot about Elián's other family members, but I haven't mentioned his father. Well, that's because his dad, Juan Miguel, was still back in Cuba, and he had no idea that Elizabeth had fled the nation with his son. You see, they had divorced not long before, and Juan had realized about 20 days after they set sail that she had fled to America. But Juan Miguel wanted his son back, and he began making appeals not only to the Cuban government, but to the American one. But the Cuban-American population stood firm behind Lazaro, stating that Elián was going to stay and become an American. And soon, this became an international story. Both of Elián's grandmothers made a trip to Miami in an attempt to bring their grandson back to Cuba. They were able to visit him under supervision at Barry University, but were unable to bring him back with them. So, they flew to Washington and met with Attorney General Janet Reno. And they would meet with her for 9 days. By this point, other nations were putting in their 2 cents, with Spain saying the child should be returned under international law, or whatever. Lazaro started Elián's process of becoming a U.S. citizen on his behalf, but a Florida judge denied his ability to do so since he was not his father. Lazaro would file an appeal on this decision, and around this time, the mayor of Miami would come out and say that county officials would in no way aid the federal government in any attempt to repatriate Elián back to Cuba. Meanwhile, though, these grandmas had successfully lobbied the U.S. Attorney General, and Janet Reno ordered for Elián to be sent back to Cuba. Thankfully, an Atlanta appellate court ruled that Elián had to remain in the United States until he could hear his appeal case. So Janet Reno did the fair thing and made a special ruling. Elián could have his appeal, but it wouldn't be in a Florida state court. It would be in a federal one, of her choosing. So, you can imagine how that went. Elián was at the center of a national debate on what should be done with him. Many people understandably felt that it was his father's right to be reunited with him, but others didn't feel comfortable sending an innocent child back to a communist dictatorship. Lazaro had even offered Juan Miguel to come to America and said that he would give him a car and help him get on his feet to help support him and Elián. But Juan Miguel refused, saying that he had no interest in immigrating to the United States, and he would still demand for his son to be returned to Cuba. But what did Elián want? Well, there was a video recorded of Elián talking to his father on the phone where he can be heard saying that he wants to stay in America. Now, were these his real feelings or was he coached? That part's up for debate. Regardless, Janet Reno ruled that Elián had to get gone by April 13th of 2000. But Lazaro and his family would bunker down in their house, refusing to leave. And all at the same time, police and protesters would surround their home. In the early morning hours of 2 a.m. on April 22nd, Janet Reno would personally call Lazaro and just coldly state, "This is your last chance to hand over Elián to U.S. federal marshals." Hearing this, Lazaro's daughter would jump up and scream into the phone, "You think we just got cameras here? Someone comes up in here, they might get hurt." After this, Reno greenlit an armed raid of the house to take the child. One of the residents of the house called an associate press photographer, Alan Diaz, to come into the room where Elián was hiding in a closet. And it was here during the raid he took this picture. This picture not only would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography for that year, but also change U.S. history. You see, 2000 wasn't just the new millennium, it was the election year, and a hotly contested one at that. Texas Governor George W. Bush was running against Vice President Al Gore. President Clinton was actually a very popular president for his time. Only problem was he was a bit too popular with female staffers and aides. His affair with and subsequent impeachment over the Monica Lewinsky affair left a stain right at the end of Clinton's presidency. Many Americans were ashamed and embarrassed and associated this feeling with Al Gore. Now, was Al Gore a strong candidate? No, not at all. But to be fair, neither was George W. Bush. To many Americans, George Bush was seen as a dumb redneck trying to follow in his father's footsteps. SNL would constantly belittle him over Al Gore, but he also wasn't doing himself any favors when he was having constant moments like this.
"I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully." There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you." If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
But as Election Day grew near, this picture was taken 6 months before Election Day, and it looked bad for Democrats, especially with the Cuban-American community in Miami. November comes, and it's a near perfect tie in the Electoral College. Al Gore had won the popular vote by 500,000 votes. But Florida had still not been called for either candidate. For a month, the United States had no idea who its president was going to be. That was until Florida had announced that George W. Bush had won Florida by 537 votes. 6 million votes had been cast, and Bush won by less than 0.01%. Al Gore sued for a recount, but the Supreme Court would deny him, and George W. Bush would become the 43rd President of the United States of America. Under normal circumstances, the Cuban-American community in Miami would vote about 60% for Republicans. However, in this election, they turned out 85% in favor of George W. Bush in protest over the Democrats' handling of the Elián González case. Bush would go on to be in charge during many crucial moments in American history, like signing No Child Left Behind, the Great Recession, and of course, being in charge during the release of Dark Horse by Nickelback. I'm probably forgetting a few other major events here and there. In all seriousness, though, George Bush and Dick Cheney would make sweeping changes to how the government and surveillance would work with the signing of the Patriot Act. And they would begin the never-ending wars in the Middle East that we still see ourselves involved in to this day. But yeah, maybe all this happened because one kid got deported. Oh yeah, but what did happen to him? Well, Elián would be reunited with his father in 2000, and he would go back home to Cuba as a national hero. Fidel Castro himself would personally greet the boy on his return and actually was very active in his life for the next 16 years. In interviews, Elián claimed that he was happy to be back in Cuba and never wanted to stay in America. He would grow up to join the military and would study to become an engineer, but his fame would carry him into a different career path: politics. Yes, this kid would go on to be elected to the National Assembly of People's Power for the Communist Party in 2023. Elián claimed had he stayed in America, he would have been a performative puppet for the Cuban dissident movement in America. Later in the same interview, he was quoted as saying, "I don't believe in religion, but if I did, my God would be Fidel Castro." Which is something any normal person says that is not a puppet themselves. But yeah, Bill Clinton showed us that Democrats can deport kids too. If you enjoyed this video, go check out last week's video where I break down multiple crazy events in the 90s and what I know is my best video. Other than that, buy merch, join the channel, support the cause. I hope you enjoy whatever food you decided to eat, or whatever poop you decided to poop when you sat down and watched this video. I'm Crate13, and I hope you have a blessed day.